Hey everyone, please take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your subscription is free and it allows us to generate some money on YouTube so that you don't have to pay for the podcast. So thank you for clicking subscribe. You can also follow us at 10 Seconds to Air on Instagram. In today's podcast, we're talking about the value of every single connection you make throughout your day, no matter how big or small. When we communicate with our loved ones, people at work, or the barista at our favorite coffee shop, we make connections that can impact our health and shape our beliefs. Joining me today to talk about their latest research are two communication experts, Andy Merolla and Jeffrey Hall. Andy is a professor at UC Santa Barbara. He studies social connections, hope, conflict management, and forgiveness. Jeffrey is a professor at the University of Kansas and is a faculty affiliate at Harvard Law School. He wrote the award-winning book Relating Through Technology and has written articles for the Wall Street Journal. He also runs the Relationships and Technology Lab at his university. Andy and Jeffrey have come together in a new book called The Social Biome. They join me now to share the science behind socialization and communication.
Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to both of you. I'm an advocate that good communication is the key to happiness and success, so I'm eager to hear all about your research and dive in.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I have to start with my first question, which is what goes through your mind before communicating, connecting, having this conversation? We'll start with you, Jeff.
Every time I do a podcast, I'm always anxious of whether or not my background makes any sense or whether or not my camera is functioning. Because these days, no matter how many times I do it, I'm still in doubt. So I'm like, I hope this works.
Okay. All right. Andy, how about you?
Yeah, usually in these types of situations, other than trying to remember, the first thing I'm going to say, I'm trying to remember to smile and to not look at my own video.
Right. It's so hard. We all look to check to see what we look like, what's going on.
That's right.
And so what is the first thing that you have in your mind that you want to say?
Oh, thank you. I already did it. So thanks for having us. So I've accomplished my goal.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sometimes I do to the lips, to the teeth, to the tip of the tongue, from my lips to the teeth, to the tip of the tongue.
Oh, all right.
Myself.
Okay.
Old trick back when I used to do forensics in high school.
So communication. Just give us the fundamental science behind communication. Why so important? Why so important to study and to share that?
Well, communication is obviously how we connect with people, but it's also how we come to know ourselves. So as we engage with people and we see how they respond to us and we hear ourselves conveying our thoughts, we come to crystallize a vision of who we are and what we believe in and what we value. So communication doesn't just bring us together with other people, but it also kind of encapsulates who we are as people and how we change over time.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, anything? I see you nodding. Anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, it's one of those things that's so much fun to study because you actually get to talk to people like you and share things that we do. Like if we did scientific research that was really hard to relate to others, it's not as much fun. So I think that part of why I study communication and passionate about it is I love trying to convey to people how important it is to relate to one another, to make friendships, to convey that sense of connection to one another, because it's some of the most important things we can do in our lives.
Mm-hmm. And what is the research that you do? What does that actually look like? What are you studying and how are you studying it?
Yeah, so both Jeff and I research communication in similar ways. A lot of times we're using surveys of people, and sometimes those surveys are, done what we call cross-sectionally, just one time. But increasingly, we've been really interested in doing longitudinal research, especially something called intensive longitudinal research, where you're trying to ask people multiple times per day to report on their experiences. So we I like to do this, for instance, on people's smartphones because they're carrying those phones around with them all day. So we might send them multiple surveys a day and say, what are you doing right now? And so this is an established methodology that a lot of other folks use. And we found it really interesting to try to get into the kind of everyday mundane interactions that we wrote about in the book. But that's been a method that we often use, though it's just one of the approaches we use. But the nice thing is it allows us to get into both those moments when people are alone and those moments when
Right.
people are around different types of individuals, and you can see how those things are related.
Right. And how are they related? What are you finding?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things is that they operate together. So how you feel alone is at least in part based on how you feel in general in your social world, in your more interpersonal interactions. So when your interpersonal communication experiences are going well and you feel really connected to other people, you're in a better position to have what we like to refer to as contented solitude. So that solitude you have is recharges your batteries a little bit better, and it's the kind of solitude you want, right? You need to kind of retreat a little bit, and then as you retreat and again recharge, you're ready to go back into that social world. So there's this homeostatic process, and Jeff has written a lot about this process, and so. The better interaction makes us feel better alone, and more restorative alone time kind of prepares us to engage in interaction.
Jeff, do you want to add anything to that?
I never know if you want me to go on or you want me
I
to...
do want you to go on. I mean, he's saying that you have the details, and I'm really curious about that. Also, between the two of, we think of communication as just the time that we spend communicating with other people. We don't think about it in our alone time. So I find that really interesting that you're putting those two together now and saying they have a direct correlation. What is that?
I mean, so what's so exciting about this kind of way of approaching things, and Andy talking about intensive longitudinal sampling, is that you get this sort of sense of how people's kind of days play out, kind of the ins and outs of everyday behavior. We know that people don't actually spend every moment of their days in communication. We actually spend more of our time not communicating than communicating. We spend our time working. We spend our time in front of media of various types. But how we feel about the connection carries over in those moments. So there's a couple of findings that we find that's amazing about this. One of which is that when you have a very positive, nourishing interaction, when you're alone later in the day, you feel contented to be there. And you don't feel a great deal of hunger to go on to the next interaction because you've already felt that sense of connection. If you're alone for a long period of time, you have the sense in which that your desire to communicate with others, your desire to connect rises. And when you seek out action to communicate with people, you actually feel more satisfied and satiated in that process. What some of the things that's really fascinating about that is that it includes which modality of communication you're using to do that, whether it's a higher, lower quality communication event, who you're talking to, and the kind of access you have to all of the people in your world. And our idea of the social biome is it sort of encompasses all of those different characteristics: who you talk to, what you talk about, what modalities you use to communicate. And in that kind of complex interplay of the way that we spend our time alone and in communication tells us a lot about our social health.
Yeah. Well, you raise a lot of issues right in there about who you're talking to. Also, what comes to mind for me is the type of person that you are. Like, for me, I really enjoy a lot of communication, a lot of interaction. I know there are other people who don't enjoy that much of it. So how do you differentiate? And is there a sweet spot for us to have enough of something? And how do we know when we have enough of it to then be satiated when we are alone?
That's a great question. One of the researchers I really call on this is Patricia Hockley, who says that we need to be careful not to pathologize loneliness, because loneliness is hunger. So if we looked at the fact that we were thirsty and said that was a problem, if we looked at the fact that we were hungry and thought that was a problem, we're missing the idea that loneliness functions to push us to be in connection with one another. So feeling lonely is actually part of a normal social system. And how we know we're actually well nourished, in part, interestingly, is because occasionally we long for people. We miss them. We want to have them close to us. We want to feel connected. And when we respond to that feeling in a way that actually pushes us towards social interactions, we tend to be happier and healthier in our overall way of being.
And is it true that there are some people that need more than others? Or, yes, you're saying.
This is the thing that's curious about that, is that there are two parts to it. One is that people, generally speaking, whether introverted or extroverted, whether they tend to be older or younger, whether they tend to be at different parts of their life, need social contact. There is very little evidence that having no amount of social contact is healthy for people. Long-term studies suggest that it predicts mortality and morbidity. our morbidity, your ability to fight off diseases is less when you're alone. So there are lots of reasons to say that 0 probably doesn't work. But what's even more interesting is research on introversion and extroversion suggests that it's actually not that different. So what's fascinating is we're going through this moment where say introverts don't need it, introverts can be alone, but the research actually finds that both tend to be really happy when they're more likely to be social, when they take those social opportunities, or even if they get into a social state of mind. So even if they sort of adopt a feeling that says, I want to be social in this world, you are actually more likely to feel happier and more connected, even if you're an introvert. Because just that feeling of trying to become more social tends to benefit people in experimental studies.
And what are you calculating as an interaction? Does it have to be really big? Does it have to be a big party? Can it be, at the grocery store? Can it be with at the coffee shop?
Yeah, so this is a research question that a lot of people approach from in different ways. So some researchers will, in fact, stipulate this interaction has to be at least 3 minutes or 5 minutes to count or something along those lines. What Jeff and I like to do, though, is make sure we're scraping some of those really small interactions, too. Like you mentioned, talking to someone at the grocery store, these small acts of kindness with someone you just happen to run into at work who you don't normally see. And they may not be especially long in terms of time, but, that positive interaction or enjoyable interaction, or especially a surprisingly enjoyable interaction, even brief, that matters, that matters for how you feel in your environment. And it sets the stage for subsequent interactions because, a small but satisfying interaction today maybe encourages you to do something a little bit different, either later in the day or next week when you see someone. So there's a cumulative and iterative quality to interaction, which means that even the small ones matter. So for us, an interaction can be rather fleeting, but it can also, of course, be the longer interactions or the ones required of us. So often in our day-to-day life, we don't get to choose the interactions we have. They're required of us from work, or they're required of us from other responsibilities, family responsibilities. And so it's all of those things.
Right.
And so when you're studying interaction, you can choose to either isolate all those different features that demarcate this type of interaction versus that type of interaction, and that's helpful. Or you can try to get that at the core features that make, say, an interaction really rewarding, right? And so there's decades now worth of research showing, what makes an interaction, whether it's that fleeting one,
right? What makes it rewarding?
That tiny interaction again at the grocery store with someone, or even a quick text, because we haven't really talked about the digital side.
We'll get there.
Yeah, versus
there.
these long extended interactions. And there's some really wonderful concepts in the literature. One of them that we borrow upon from some social psychologists such as Harry Reese is the concept of perceived partner responsiveness. And so this is the kind of quality of reward that can cut across all those interactions, large or small. And it's about how much did the person make you feel respected? How much did the person make you feel cared for? How much did they make you feel validated in whatever it was that you were talking about? Whether it was talking about the weather or talking about something really meaningful to you, even a conflict. So there's different ways to either isolate what makes each interaction unique, or what features of the interactions maybe cut across and demarcate that rewarding versus a less rewarding interaction.
Well, dive into that just a little bit. What makes it a quality interaction? What do we need to have in order for us to feel that was a quality interaction?
Well, it's going to depend on your goals, of course, because sometimes you have very straightforward goals, and that goal might be marked by, say, efficiency. Like when you need something from maybe a member of your staff and you need it quickly, what's going to make that a quality interaction is the efficiency with which that happened and the timeliness. So in those situations where you have a very straightforward goal, maybe those features, like we talked about, responsiveness, aren't quite as salient. That doesn't mean it doesn't come into play. But then there's interactions where our goals are actually highly relational. It is to connect. And so, goals are going to come into play always. at the same time, what we want is to have someone, they don't have, when we say something like validation, we're not saying that they necessarily agree with us, so it's not that we are always looking for people to agree with us. What we want is to perceive that there was some level of effort given. And that's a perception, some level of effort given to see where we were coming from, to give us their time.
To feel heard,
as we were,
to feel
yeah, to be heard.
Yeah.
And one way you can think about this is, and we've written about this, is like the energy you spend. And it's almost like when you think about, we have limited energy every day. We have limited, ability to put ourselves into things. And when you perceive that someone right here, right now is spending that energy on you, giving you their time, giving your attention, which is hard and valuable, especially in, modern day situations we live in, that's a way to think about that reward value. So when we feel like someone's being, say, responsive to us or validating us or showing us respect, it operates along with the actual words and the content, but it's also like, a more subterranean perception sometimes of, is this person giving me their time and attention and effort? Are they being intentional with how they're interacting with me, again, whether that interaction is momentary or much longer.
And how about an interaction that's not of quality, or that is a negative interaction? How do you determine that?
So one of the things that we talk about in the book too is that, when people feel as if that they're not being heard, they feel as if they're not being shown dignity. These things reverberate over a long period of time, right? They feel as if that they're not connected. They feel as if their need to belong is not being satisfied. And they can actually even change their perception of whether they even feel like their community is safe or their workplace is safe, or it's a place they even want to continue to be. What's interesting is we talk about this research in the book, but one of the things that we talk about is that the effect of a negative interaction, in terms of statistically speaking, is like 8 times or 10 times larger in its effect size when it does a positive.
That was really interesting. So say that again.
So statistically speaking, we talk about these concepts of effects, right? So how big of an effect does something have? And so what's nice is that most negative interactions are rare. They don't happen a lot. So most people are not experiencing lots of negative interactions in a day. But when they do, the size of that effect is much bigger than a positive effect.
Wow.
And it's as much as 8 or 10 times larger. And the reason that it tends to be larger partly is that it takes so much out of us when we feel undermined, when we feel uncared for or undignified. So one example of this that we talk about that I think is really interesting is the people who have workplaces where there are conflictual situations, customer service circumstances where they're dealing with angry customers, they're having workplace indignities where people in their own job don't respect them. What will happen is that at the end of the day, they turn to their friends and family to feel restored and renewed. But those carryover effects makes it harder to get what they need at home to feel connected and cared for, because they're, as you might guess, going home and like, oh my God, today was awful and all these things are happening. So we rely on our closest partners to heal us, because people who are taking, having those negative interactions with us tend to be ones which carry over even in circumstances after the day is over, into the night, and in that study, even into the next day. So I think what's really interesting about this is not only those negative interactions palpably, sensorily experienced, stress, arousal, sweating, anxiety, negativity, and all those things, but in terms of correcting or being able to get back to a state of homeostasis to feel cared for, you got to actually really call on your, energy reserves and the people that you care about to get you back into a good state.
And can you really do that? Or you going home at a real deficit and then you're having to build back? So you were at 0 when you walked out the door, and now, or even a 50 or however you calculate it, and now you come home at a negative 50. Can you restore that?
Well, I think that this fits into the idea that we're actually constantly in a process of moving in and out of social interactions that are both good and bad, that are mundane, but that are exceptional. There are ones which are really, really stressful, and there are ones that are at ease. And throughout that, we kind of have a baseline sense in which that we are feeling stressed. So the concept is that when you're constantly feeling unacknowledged, not cared for, that you're having, these experiences that you have generally are more negative than positive, and your needs are not met in that sense of feeling belonging or connection to others, that you are generalized feeling of unsafety. you are just constantly feeling as if you're not in a safe space. That this level of stress carries on throughout our days, and actually is probably why that people who are unsocially supported or lack in their lives, why they're more likely to have disease prevalence. They're less able to kind of fight off infections when they happen, that they tend to also have other kind of characteristics which make them sick. So when we think about this, why is it important for us to be social? But why is it also important to show dignity to our colleagues at work, or to show care and concern for somebody that is in our day-to-day lives? It's because that generalized feeling of sense of safety creates a stress level that throughout all of your days affects whether or not you're a healthy person.
Yeah. So the toxic work environment is really toxic.
Truthfully, it could be any environment. It could be your home environment too.
Yeah.
Right. And we know for a fact that folks who are raised in environments in which they never develop a sense of secure attachment struggle throughout their lives to be able to form those attachment relationships. Not that they can't, but they have to work harder at doing so, and need to have that sense in which that their connection to others is restored.
Right. Social biome. How'd you come up with that name? That's an interesting one.
This concept was kind of years in the making, and pinpointing the moment that it arose is difficult. But one thing that we distinctly remember is we were talking about the first study we ever worked on together, which again was kind of that intensive longitudinal design study where we were sending people surveys on their smartphones to try to get at these everyday interactions. And after we talked about that study and completed that study, we were kind of thinking about, what are the good and bad interactions of our day, and if these small moments of interaction accumulate and shape us. At the same time, our moments of interaction are only partly under our control. And it kind of remind us of, not only the biome concept from, say, ecology or biology, and talking about the climate of a place, or the animals or the plants of a place, which kind of defines life in a place. But also, we've all probably read a lot of articles and stories and maybe books about the human microbiome, and how we are the product of these trillions of microbes in and on our body. And, we started thinking about if just like, say, you're the microbiome, you are both a product of your choices when it comes to, the foods you eat or the places you go. But you're also kind of like subject to a lot of things beyond your control, the environments you just happen to be born in, or the people around you that you don't always get to choose. And that notion of these tiny phenomena having outsized influence on us in combination and only partly under our control, it was a lot of things we were either saying in our research or just talking to each other about. And so we started thinking that you not only have, say, a human microbiome, or we live in regions characterized by a biome, but we have a social biome, the people around us, the interactions we engage in. These are the small things that shape us, some of them being good, some of them being bad, some of them being under our control, and a lot of them not. And in combination, we think they shape your health, and both shape and reflect. Right. And so it was a metaphor that just gave us a lot to think about. And it was fun for us to talk about. And so that led us to think that maybe this would be, fun for other people to hear about as well.
And I think a lot of people don't think about it like that. We really take communication for granted. I know in my work, when I get into it, I realize a lot of people just don't spend any time thinking about it. The small interactions, the small connections, and the big connections as well, the negative ones and the positive ones, which also leads me to the digital communication, the technology that we're all dependent on now, communicating through technology, and how that affects us, because we don't really look at it and say, this was good, this was bad. But I feel, and there's been research, that it leaves us with a feeling, which is what you talked about having a good interaction, that you can go and sort of get your battery charged, and that left you feeling really good. So I know, Jeff, you have a lab on all of this, and what does the research actually find when it comes to digital technology?
So in the chapter on the social biome, we offer 7 actionable items, things that you can do to actually nourish your social biome. And one of the ones we talk about is this idea of moving up the ladder of connection. So the concept there is that each type of interaction that we have through digital environments has kind of a greater level empirically based on research, but also in how much we can get connected with one another. And at the lowest level is probably using social media just passively, consuming it, reading it, seeing it. And that may have no difference in being alone in terms of your overall well-being. It's no particular benefit socially. One step up might be things like actively sort of seeing pictures of your friends and family, commenting on those, having a group chat, something that you're actually kind of keeping in touch with what's going on in the world around you. It's very much like people watching, but it tends to be better than this social media that you're consuming that's more like television or kind of broadcast. One step above that is an interaction that's done through text. One step above that is one that we might be done on the phone call or video chat, and then face to face. And what we want to encourage people to do is to think about, as you say, it's not a case of just it's good or it's bad. It's both good and bad.
Yeah.
And in that sense that you can use technologies in ways to extend connection. You can improve the number of connection options you have. And I'll give you a simple example. There's research that finds that when you send a text message, even to an old friend, a person who you haven't talked to for a while, and say, hey, just thinking about you, that they enjoy it so much more than you know. Like you estimated that they'll like it like this.
Interesting.
They like
Okay.
it a lot. Yeah,
Okay.
they really appreciate it. And in fact, it usually precipitates a further interaction, right? That person writes back. They say, I'd love to see you again. So good to hear from you. So it's interesting, these tiny moments of connection that are made possible through our digital devices. We often have reasons we don't do that. Either we don't do it because like, oh, they don't want to hear from us, or I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is the research on this is just saying, hey, I saw this thing that reminded me of that time we went out to dinner that one time, or I remember, that reminded me of something that you love, or a band that you were into, or a hobby that you enjoy. You just say, you are in my mind right now, and I'm taking an opportunity with my mobile communication to tell you right now I care about you, you're interesting to me. So this can be done with people you care about a lot, family, friends, romantic partners. But this can be done with people that you haven't seen for a long time. You're just bringing them back into your recall, back into your social environment that you're in. So I like to use that example because it's a low energy, low stakes way to build connection. And it's one of the 7 different strategies that we offer in the book.
Go back to the baseline one, because you said that first one is just sort of, it sounds like it's passive, but is it really passive?
Well, no media use is completely passive, right? Especially since we know that algorithms shape what we watch, meaning that you are providing information to media corporations and companies to tell you how we will stay on media for longer periods of time. I mean, there's a feedback loop there, right? It's also not passive in the sense in which that we are actually engaging in it. And the more we engage in it, the more pleasure we get from it. So I was just watching a series of unfortunate events on Netflix with my 11-year-old daughter. She's way into that show right now, and we really think it's well done. And we talk about it. So we are actively engaging while we passively sit and watch television. So all media has the potential to be actively engaged in a way that shares the experience of what media ultimately is great about, sharing the human experience, emotion, ideas, tragedy, learning. I mean, there's all kinds of great uses of it. The big issue here is that you have to transition the idea away from media as something that you passively consume without any sort of way of feeling connected to one another. And in that sense, the research suggests the more and more you see as media as a way of supplementing or substituting for human connection, the more likely it is that you're also going to experience the negative effects of feeling more lonely or disconnected.
Let's hold on to that for just a second, because that's where the piece that I've sort of wanted to dive into. I feel like we're talking a lot about the positive of interaction, or the positive of the media interaction, digital. But the negative side of that is, are you missing out on a human connection? And would that be better? Right. So let's say, how many times do you see a group of people and they're all on their phones, right? They're all looking for something. Maybe they're having an interaction through their phone, whether it's, sending a message to someone, hey, how have you been? I miss you, or something, or they're seeing something, but aren't they missing out on a bigger reward by not having an actual human connection?
Yeah, I think there are two answers to this. The first is that we talk about in the book that there has been a downward trend since the 90s in terms of people spending time in communication face-to-face. And this happens in the United States, the UK, Australia, throughout Europe. It's growing. People are spending less time talking to each other for pleasure, right? Just to talk, right? We also know that social media consumption is going higher and higher and higher, right? The amount of time spent. What's very, very tricky is that we also know that people who are alone tend to turn to social media in order to use their time. This is not dissimilar to people who had lots of time in the past and spend it in front of a television set.
Okay.
It's a very similar phenomenon. What's tricky about it is to actually make the argument that you're saying. Are people displacing one for the other? And generally the research is, it does not. And the reason it doesn't is that social people find ways to use social technologies in a social way, right? So they find ways to share memes. They find ways to share TikToks. That group that you mentioned, they may be playing a game together and are like nudging each other and joking with each other as they do it. If I'm in a waiting room also, and then thinking, like at a doctor's office, I'm talking to my mom because I'm concerned or I'm worried, I am also being social. So I think what's interesting here is we tend to, from a third party perspective, look at people who aren't interacting, but they could, as if that's somehow a negative thing.
Right.
But really, the possibilities of being social are always there and with us, and we don't know the full extent in which they're reaching out to one another.
Mm-hmm.
So that all said, it's generally not a good idea to ignore the people around you with your phone. There's pretty good evidence, especially when you're getting to know somebody or meeting a new person, that never looking up for your phone or ignoring them is considered rude, not effective, lower quality communication. So I'm not advocating it. I'm saying is, generally speaking, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
That said, a lot of times when people are in groups with one another, they're actually sharing more media than we think.
So back to some of your research, I'm curious if you tested this at all.
Sure.
You talked about a live communication with another human, in-person communication. What do you call that, by the way? In-person communication?
Social interaction.
Social interaction does not include a digital interaction. Is that right?
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
Yeah. Okay.
When we talk about it, our social interaction could happen through any technology.
Okay, so what's the interaction called if I'm human to human?
Face-to-face.
Face-to-face. Okay. Yeah. So face-to-face interaction versus a digital interaction. Am I using the terminology right? Okay. So the reward that you get if you were to have a similar, or this is what I'm looking for, I guess, is there a similarity between a face-to-face interaction and a digital interaction? What's the equivalent? It's like if you're a runner and you run, but then you can't run, so you walk. How much walking do I have to do to get the same benefit of that 3-mile run? So how much digital interaction do I have to do to get the same benefit of that face-to-face interaction?
That's a very good question. I like the way you made it really specific, because social scientists like us love specific questions.
I'm really being very careful with my words here.
It's fabulous. Bottom line is that there's very, very good evidence that a phone call is probably just as good as face-to-face. The research, like historically, contemporaneously, phone calls tend to carry as much of the high quality sense of connection than do face-to-face. There's good reason to think that video chat will. But what's the tricky about that is a lot of people conflate video chat conversations with work. And work conversations are not particularly connecting.
Right.
But people, young folks particularly, quite enjoy having, I see them walking around campus constantly. They're talking to a friend, their video chat's on while they're doing it. They're using it in a way that I might have seen people use the phone in the past. That said, once you kind of go down to text messages, group chats, and the rest, tends to be, study after study, lower quality. And probably, to be honest, I doubt that there is a sufficient amount of those amounts of things you can do to get your needs fully met. I think that there's very good reason to believe that a person who lives a 100% mediated experience through texting or social media is probably fully feeling connected to others. It's doubtful.
It's doubtful that they're, doubtful. Okay.
With one big caveat, it may be all they've got. And maybe the only thing they've got. Okay. One of the stories I told recently that I think is very important is a man who worked out in the oil fields of near not too far from where I live in Kansas. And his contact that he had while he's working in these fields was primarily with his sister through text. Didn't keep in touch otherwise, didn't really talk much. That young man ended up committing suicide, right?
Wow.
He ended up taking his life. And for years, he just did not have the amount of connection face-to-face or otherwise to make him feel, nourished and cared for. Mm-hmm. But Andy brought this terrific story up during the book that we tell about Beatrice Flamini, who goes down into a cave and she stays there for tons of time. And the only contact she has with people is by text. And she comes out and she's like, I love it. I could do this all of the time. This was great. What's really tricky is that it's conceivable that people can get their needs met through an only text interaction. but they also have to choose that solitude. They also have to be somebody who is ready to experience that level of social deprivation.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us, it seems, just are not built to be able to be like Beatrice Flamini and go to, down to a cave and survive without human contact. Most of us do not seem to be capable of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
The story was so fun because when I think where did you find that one, Andy? Where did you find the Beatrice Flamini story?
I think it was like driving in the car and I heard it on NPR or something like that, or BBC or something like that.
Those kind of things, I think, challenge a researcher's point of view. If they want to say something like absolutely never, and you come upon a case like that, you go, well, no, not necessarily. She said, what did she say? Like, I'd do it again. Like I was
right. But the caveat there is this was also a very controlled situation, right? So she did have people caring for her in a sense. They were, checking in on her,
right.
taking care of even her waist, right? I mean, so it's not as if so context matters, choice matters.
Yeah.
And what Jeff is getting at that's so important is it's about what we have available and the choices we make.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't say that someone's making an inherently bad choice if they choose to use digital, forms of communication over face-to-face, because that assumes that they have the option for face-to-face. And it assumes they have all the requisite psychological, personal safety that makes that okay for them. And we know that a lot of people just don't, or they don't have sufficient social networks that just make it an easy choice of like, why is that person choosing not to engage with others face to face? It's not always their choice.
So yeah, that brings up an interesting question for the two of you, not your research, but what you do on a day-to-day basis. What do you actually choose for your own communication?
Well, one of the things that we like to mention is when we're writing about the challenges of communication, and we write about it a lot in the book or in other places, we're including ourselves in that process. This challenge of connecting is real for everyone. It's not even. Some people are thriving, and some people have a lot of options, a full calendar, are feeling really great about where they're at. But the average person goes through challenges, some more than others. Second guesses themselves regularly in social interaction, overthinks interaction, wonders if they're doing it right or if people around them like them. Also, the average person feels disappointed sometimes in the people around them. That is seemingly, to us at least, inseparable from social connection.
Yep.
You don't get that difficulty, that challenge, that disappointment, if you're endeavoring to connect. It's all part of the same process, right? To be vulnerable is to leave yourself open to disappointment and rejection.
Yep.
So I mentioned, when thinking about ourselves, sometimes what this insight can offer you is context for why you're experiencing challenges. Why is it that I'm feeling frustrated? Why am I making the choices that I'm making? It doesn't always lead you to an easy prescription to fixing it. That doesn't mean there aren't answers.
Right.
But sometimes just knowing that, maybe there's some good reasons that I'm choosing digital interactions over social interactions if I have those choice, that can give you a lot of insight. Maybe it's because, one thing we haven't talked about is we do pile up the pressure on ourselves. We are sometimes our harshest critics is ourselves when we're interacting. There's a fair amount of research now on something called a liking gap and something called miscalibrated expectations. And oftentimes interactions go better than we think they actually will.
So what
like us more.
What are you saying? You're saying that we don't read the room the right way? Are you saying that
we tend to be harder on ourselves than seems warranted when it comes to everyday interaction and interpersonal communication?
We think it didn't go well when maybe it did. We think somebody else was thinking something and they really weren't.
That's right. Or we think it went worse than it actually did. So even if it was you weren't your best, you dropped some jokes that didn't quite land, maybe it's not as bad as you think. So why that is such a vital realization is it keeps you trying despite the disappointment, right? Because again, social connection doesn't come without risk. It doesn't come without disappointment. It doesn't come without making mistakes. So So keeping that in mind, again, better calibrates what our expectations are going into interaction and what our expectations for in terms of the returns. So it's important to have a much more humane view of the challenges. And we say that because even if we study communication all day, every day, and that's what we teach and that's what we write about, sometimes what that offers you is a better contextualization for the challenges rather than some, get out of jail free card around them.
Good point. Okay, good point. But it still goes back to my question of how do you operate with your communication on a daily basis? I want to know what you guys do, what you choose.
So one of the things that one of the most important things is I try to be, when I can, as responsive as I can to the people around me, and especially in the times when I might otherwise not do that. And just be clear, that doesn't mean I don't get it wrong. But if I am in the office and somebody's coming down the hall, I try to remember just to acknowledge them and say hi. And even if I'm rushing, or I try to flash a smile to someone if it's appropriate and I'm on campus or something. These are tiny things. But if I'm not willing to put in the effort like that, then how would I be willing to put in the effort in the more challenging moments? So I think in some ways, I like to think of these small moments, these little extra efforts as like practice. This is the training ground. This is where we get comfortable with social interaction that goes well, and we get comfortable with social interaction that doesn't go so well. So when it's most consequential in those really, really important interactions, two things happen. Number one, we've built up a storehouse of maybe positive emotion that we can benefit from, but also our skills are a bit sharpened. If we don't engage when we can, or at least we don't endeavor to engage when we can, we risk our social skills atrophying a little bit. And if we can't muster the effort to practice on a day-to-day basis, I think it's expecting a lot of us ourselves to go into these really consequential moments and nail it.
Right.
So so that's something that's a tangible consequence of doing this work. To try harder.
Right. Try harder.
Not because I'm going to get it right necessarily all the time, but I'm going to go down trying.
Right. But I like that. I like that idea or that concept that in those small moments, even with a stranger, even we talked about, the barista or whatever at the supermarket or in the hallway at work, to have those positive or just kind interactions, because it fills you up to then be ready for the bigger interactions to put that forward. I think of just some curmudgeon person who probably is a curmudgeon to everyone. It just doesn't happen at home, or it just doesn't happen when they're interacting with someone at the supermarket, but it's probably what they're practicing. And if you're going to continue to practice that, that's your go-to. So I like that you formulated it like that. I like how you set that up to say, practice those things or they'll atrophy. So be kind, put a smile on your face, put your best foot forward when you're interacting with people, because when you think it's meaningless, because it is meaningful, it will come about somewhere. You'll need to pull from that.
That's right. Outside of our conversation, we were talking about why is interpersonal communication, or what communication is important. Well, again, we come to know ourselves in how we interact with others, not just based on their response, but also how we perform every day. And I don't mean performance in a bad way. I mean, even just the natural way we all have to play roles. If you're endeavoring to do, to be kinder, say, to others, you're inhabiting a worldview that says this is important to me. Right. And I think that that matters individually, but imagine across a community, a social biome, if you will, right? These small moments maybe add up across an organization. And to be clear, this is not a prescription to fix all these social problems just because people are endeavoring to be a bit more kind. That's naive. But it's hard to figure out the way forward to making people feel a little bit better in a world in which not everybody's feeling great right now. Right. at the very least, we're not trying in those small moments.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
hear you.
so that's why we see this as a very hopeful perspective, because there's a lot of challenges of communication to be ironed out, but maybe starting small is an entry point for a lot of us. That this is the place to begin venturing out into sociality a bit more, in an era when a lot of us, intentionally or feel it's forced upon us, we're retreating a little bit.
Does your research suggest that being face to face is better? In other words, should everyone be going back to work, and being face to face as opposed to remote? That's kind of a topic that some people say, no, I want to stay remote. It's better. And then there were reports that executives and higher ups preferred people to be face to face, and the argument was that they thought it was better for business. And then there was another sidebar argument. There was one report out that said, oh no, it's just so executives feel better so that they have, their people around them. So what is it, though, on a communication scale? Does your research support that people should be face-to-face and in the office?
Now, I've written about this a bit for the Wall Street Journal, as one of the topics that I've covered a bit. And I think that one way to think about it is that issues of loneliness at work won't be fixed by just bringing people back to the office. The reason that people are lonely at work have a lot to do with the kind of things that Andy's talking about, and day-to-day interaction, dignity you're being shown. Even things like the corporation cares whether or not you are friendly with your coworkers matters. This has to do with modeling. This has to do with leaders actually showing that you show concern for a person's well-being beyond what they perform at work. There are lots of factors. So I don't think the solution is bring everybody back to work and everyone's more connected. I don't think that's true. On the other hand, I think that there's also something to be said about if you do not have moments of interaction which are casual, easy, part of your routines, it's hard to find opportunities to have them. So one way to think about this is if I'm talking to you on Zoom, chances are you and I are not having the side conversation about how your kids are doing. We're not having the side conversation about the weather or about traffic or whatever you talk about in Los Angeles, right? We're only talking about what we talked about on that screen in that moment. What we believe to be true is that these casual moments of interaction with our neighbors, with our coworkers, with our family, they build up in a way that's actually really meaningful. So when you work remotely, but you are not making time, or the employer doesn't allow for time to have that kind of casual opportunity to check in, see how you're doing, it just doesn't happen. And a lot of times people on Zoom get really frustrated if someone's taking up that time to chat. They're like, we gotta keep on track. We better keep going. But what's weird is, I'm sure you've had this experience too. If people are sitting around a table and they're chatting with one another and they're animated and excited, right? I mean, that's the appropriate thing to do. It's actually good for the meeting energy for everybody to be doing that. But on Zoom or on other things, people are like, stop wasting my time.
Right.
So I think that there's kind of two ways to look at this. This isn't a solution to workplace loneliness. But it's definitely the case that if you only experience interactions online, you're missing a lot of that casual, easy, routine ways of communicating with one another.
Which, as you say in the book, is a direct correlation to your well-being and to shaping who you are and your beliefs, right? So,
you got it.
So we need the interaction. So what if we want to start today? If I'm listening and I want to start today to be a better communicator, what can I do?
Well, the first thing you can do is take an inventory of your day-to-day communicative life. Think about the options you have. Where do my opportunities lie? So we talked about workplace just a moment ago. If you're working remotely, the answer to that question might be different than if you're in the office every day, right? So if you're in the office every day and you regularly pass colleagues, or customers or clients or whoever you work with, just trying at least start with one interaction a day where you give it a little bit more effort on the responsive side, right? And see how you feel, see how it goes. Take inventory of what went well and what didn't, what your expectations were going into it, and what they were afterwards. Essentially, be your own researcher. And then if you catalog that a little bit every day and you start to say, here's what I liked about this, here's what felt weird about that, you get a sense for what makes sense for you. So taking that inventory is important, for your job. What about at home? Well, you could think about how are you handling, say, digital distraction? it's a reality that we all have a lot of digital demand right now on our phone, either because it's easy way to escape a moment or there's something demanding our attention on our phone. I think a good place to start is just trying to be mindful, at least when you get home or in a certain segment of the day, to say, I'm going to try to keep my phone focus a little lower. Right. So I really like this idea of starting small and being very intentional about starting small and then scaling up in the place where you feel like you're making some inroads. And then when it's not going well, trying to ask yourself why that's the case. Because everybody does have unique needs. But as you start small and start having success, I think it builds your confidence to try it again. And if you find yourself trying and it's not going well, then you can start to say, all right, what's missing? Right. How do I find those things?
Right.
And if you can find that in person through meeting new people, great. If you can't, well, that's when the digital world can be really wonderful, finding online communities or something like that. So just starting with an inventory first. Where are the opportunities? Starting small, building up, and then finding where the gaps are, and seeing if you can plug some things there. And then one other point that we both think is important or a missed opportunity is we have a lot of people from our past that we only kind of occasionally interact with. And it can be really difficult sometimes to reach back out to someone because you wonder, do they want to hear from me? Maybe that would be awkward or and sometimes if there's somebody from your past that you would like to reconnect with in an appropriate way, and reach back out just to say, hey, think seriously about taking that opportunity. There is something that can be really wonderful about rekindling old relationships. It's not always just about creating new ones. So we could go on and on with other tips, but those are some of the ones that come to mind.
We just want to get started. I think we want to let people know that they can get started. Anything I didn't ask you about that you wanted to mention that we didn't touch on?
Well, one thing I would bring up is, communication, though we use it as this singular term, I communicate, you communicate, that was a social interaction or so, people have very different understandings of communication. Some people, we talked about earlier, need more interaction than others. That's true. But other people just have different standards for what makes interaction good. And so this is one of the inevitable and inherent challenges of interpersonal communication and by extension connection. Some people do want things to just be brief and to the point. And, you say things if you have something to say and you don't when you don't. And then there's those among us on the other side of the continuum. We just love to talk for the sake of talking. And so when we say what is good communication or bad communication, we have to realize that that's filtered through our standards. Yeah. And I think that is both a recipe sometimes for our disappointment of like, oh, why didn't that go so well? Well, it's not because you did anything wrong. You were just applying your standards for how this should be. And the other person was applying a different set of standards. That can be, if acknowledging that is really important, because I guarantee there's people in our lives who we love dearly, our friends in particular, who when we first met them, it was somewhat awkward, or you didn't know this person if they were your kind of person. And if we stop there, just because maybe we were filtering our communication through different standards or expectations, we would have missed out on this really amazing relationship.
Right.
So sometimes, exploring how we evaluate communication can really open our eyes to say like, oh, okay, maybe there's some real opportunities I'm missing here. Maybe I'm evaluating things, especially myself, a bit too harshly.
Andy, Jeff, thank you so much for your time. This was very helpful for all of us. I mean, who doesn't want to be better at communication and better understanding, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and just for our own well-being, just makes us all better.
Absolutely.
Thank you.